I'm Father Kevin Peake with the Archdiocese of Atlanta, presently serving in prison ministry. And I thank you for your opportunity to reflect upon what I do and for your intentions to come alongside and support what we're doing. First of all, the prison ministry deals with several different levels of incarceration. The first is jails, which are usually pre-trial, where individuals have not yet been tried for their alleged activities. After they are tried and convicted, then they get sent to prison. Most of them start at the diagnostic center in Jackson, Georgia, where they are evaluated and then sent out to the prison that is deemed most appropriate for their rehabilitation, hopefully. Then as they proceed through that process, there's several different levels of prisons, from minimal security, medium security, maximum security, up to and including death row. We also do the United States Federal Penitentiary in downtown Atlanta for those who are convicted of federal crimes. This doesn't mean that their crimes were necessarily worse than those who commit state crimes. It just means they're a different category. Finally, there's the transition centers, and those are the areas wherein individuals who are coming near the end of lengthy sentences are moved to work in work programs where they are allowed to leave the prison for 8 hours a day to work and find employment, to save money for apartments, to begin to build their social skills and their connections to others, and to understand the workings of society. You can imagine that some of these individuals have been away for 20 years or more, and life has changed greatly since they were first incarcerated. This gives them the opportunity then to be successful when they come out. In the prison ministry, we focus on sacraments primarily, confession, the Eucharist, but there's also an opportunity for RCIA, which then would include baptism and confirmation. We also help individuals out with preparing for marriage, and those who have struggled in their relationships throughout their lives. We even help them with annulments to get their lives and their situations rectified. We also work with Bible studies. We use a lot of videos and DVDs as available, both as available in our collection and as available within the allowances of the prison. Some prisons do not allow us to use electronics or DVD players. So you run into a struggle because each prison, each jail, each institution is autonomous unto itself and has its own rules and regulations. And we have to learn all of these and try to find ways to meet them and as well meet the needs of the prisoners at the same time. In our prison ministry, we try to emphasize validation, forgiveness, and motivation to accountability. The validation is to validate them as a human being, because many of these individuals, throughout their lives, their upbringings, and certainly throughout their judgment and incarceration, have been told and feel that they are less than human or less than worthy of anything. The prison system also struggles to meet the needs of the prisoners in this way, as many of the hirees are not even treated appropriately with proper compensation and work environments and promotional opportunities. Many of them are struggling to find work altogether, and this is the job that they fell into without any prior training or particular passion or understanding of the situation. So the validation of these individuals is an important piece of it all. Of course, forgiveness, understanding that no matter what they've done, God has mercy and forgiveness for us all and desires the healing and restoration of us all. When you look through the scriptures, there are many individuals who committed grievous crimes that God still used for great purposes. and counted on in powerful ways. And so explaining this and sharing this with the prisoners enables them to know that their lives are not over and are not worthless, but are valuable and purposeful. In fact, my first prison that I went into, an individual came up to me and said that he wanted to take a vow. And I said, "What kind of vow?" And he said, "Well, kind of like the monks take vows." And I said, "Well, you don't just take vows like that. You don't just walk up and say, yeah, I'll do this. You have to work towards it. You have to educate. You have to develop yourself spiritually." I said, "Why do you want to take this vow?" And he said, "Well, because I'm going to be in here a long time. And I want to see this as my monastery. I want to make this a place of prayer." And I thought that was just an amazing insight that he had that would enable him to kind of flip the script on his sentence and on his time served to make it a place of prayer. These individuals are very valuable in the war that we are in, the cultural and spiritual war that we are in, as they have plenty of time to spend in prayer for all of our needs. And lastly, to motivate them to accountability, to let them know that their future is in their hands, that together with God they can do whatever they dream and whatever they want, as long as they are willing to take ownership and accountability for everything and continue to do the next right thing, whatever that is. And this leads us then to the idea of freedom. That freedom, to borrow a phrase from the Army chaplaincy, freedom is not the absence of walls or gates. Freedom is the presence of God. And so allowing these individuals to see that they are not limited. They may be physically limited, but spiritually, emotionally, intellectually, they are not limited by anything or anyone. Stephen Curtis Chapman wrote a song one time called "Free," after he had visited death row, I believe in Louisiana. There he met an individual who he said had the light of Christ just burning in his eyes and the peace of God in his heart. And he had said that he had never met a man more free than in there on death row. It is possible, it is necessary that these individuals come to this understanding and experience of freedom, that in God we find the ability to become whatever He needs us to be. We also find, interestingly enough, I did the wrong readings for this weekend coming up last night in the prison that I was working in. And the readings were from year A. And they all had to do with the law. And they all had to do with the freedom that God gives us within the law. And I talked to the prisoners about how when you buy a car, the manual that it comes with tells you specifically what kind of oil to use, what kind of gasoline to use, what kind of tires to use. And you're free to do whatever you want. You're free to put antifreeze in the oil. You're free to put water in the gas. You're free to do whatever you want to do. But whatever you do, you're going to damage the performance of that vehicle, and it is not going to perform for as long as it should or as well as it should. And in fact, it's going to break down. The same thing with the human being. God made us, and therefore the commandments and the laws that we are given are not there to imprison us or restrict us. They're there to help us perform to the best of our ability, to the longest of our ability. I taught at Pinecrest several years ago back on Birmingham Highway. At the time I was on hiatus from the seminary, or I thought I was on hiatus. I thought I was on a lifetime hiatus. I had run from the seminary and was just trying to figure out what to do next and how to get there, and trying to listen to God, but afraid of what He might say to me. When I came to Pinecrest, Arlene Gannon assigned me to run the holy hours for seminarians. So each Wednesday, I believe it was, I was to organize the whole school coming into the chapel throughout the day to pray for seminarians. Well, I think she knew what she was doing. I think God put her up to it. And in the midst of that, I ended up discovering that true freedom wasn't running away from a vocation that I thought was going to imprison me with its regulations and restrictions, but rather true freedom was embracing what God had created me to be and to do right where I was, right in the midst of what He was calling me to be. Perhaps one of the most striking moments in my prison ministry in regards to the attitudes and mindsets that you can encounter within the prisons was on death row a couple years ago. The rioting in Baltimore and Ferguson was going on that summer. The earthquake in Nepal that had stranded people on Mount Everest and caused all kinds of death and destruction in the villages below was just recent in the news. And so in the midst of Mass, I asked if anyone had any intentions, anything they wanted to pray for. And the first gentleman spoke up and he began to pray for the victims in Nepal and the people who were still, we were unable to reach or rescue. He prayed for their safety. He prayed for the safety of the people going in after them. And he prayed for those who had died and their families, that they would find peace. The next gentleman stepped forward and he began to pray for all of the people in Baltimore and Ferguson, specifically the law officers. Anyone going in there to try to support the law and to maintain the structure of society. And he prayed that they would be safe and that they would do their jobs in justice and in mercy. The third gentleman then came forward and he prayed for the victim, the grandchildren and children of his victim, praying that God would fill the void in their life that he had created through his crime, and that he would bring peace and joy again to their lives. At that point, I didn't even know what to say. I couldn't even hardly speak. I sat there and thought, here were three individuals who are on death row, who have every reason to be sullen or angry or bitter at themselves, at God, at the system, at whatever. And instead, they were looking beyond their walls to the needs of those most in need at that time and really praying from the heart the good wishes of God upon them. Visiting prisoners is one of the corporal works of mercy simply because Jesus said, "Whatever you do to the least of my brethren, you do to me." And Jesus himself was incarcerated, albeit briefly, right through his passion and up to his death. And so visiting the prisoners, it's hard to imagine today anyone that we might consider less a person than the prisoners. Those who are sick, even ghastly so, we tend to immediately have a sense of mercy, a sense of compassion, a sense of empathy for. But for those in prison, it's a little harder to work up a sense of care and concern and love for them, because we tend to look at their situation and say, well, they're getting what they deserve. They're just, dirt bags anyway, so why should we care about them? Interestingly enough, that's sometimes the attitude that I encounter even amongst the prison guards. Many of them are grossly underpaid, and many of them come from very difficult backgrounds themselves. And so they get their sense of respect and power by looking down on the prisoners and giving them a hard time. One of the prisoners one time said to me, "We are sent to prison as punishment, not to be punished." And I thought that was so telling, because oftentimes we think that it's to be punished. And we think that, like we see in the movies, the guards have a full realm to be hard and harsh upon these individuals. But that's not the way it's supposed to be. And that's not going to help them for rehabilitation. Rehabilitation is all about ransoming the individual and helping them get back onto their feet again. And so the other term for this corporal work of mercy is oftentimes to ransom the prisoner. Now, In the olden days, that actually meant that some of these individuals would go and pay for the freedom of prisoners, especially those who might have been captured in the Crusades or whatnot. They would go and pay ransom fees to buy their freedom. And if they couldn't, then in some cases, heroically, these individuals would go exchange places with these prisoners, giving their lives, in a sense, in a very real sense, for the freedom of the other individual. Today, that's not possible. We don't pay to reduce sentences. Although, if you're on probation, you might pay a fee or something. But when you are fully convicted of a crime, money isn't going to get you out unless we're more corrupt than we know. Instead, the individual has to serve their time. Now, I don't think they'd let us switch places with them either. And so today, ransoming the prisoner, I would look at in a much more spiritual way, and a much more psychological and emotional way. It's to go in and ransom them from the guilt and the shame that they have pulled upon themselves, so that we can free their spirits and they can become again the individuals God created them to be. Finally, how can we help then? How can we do this without visiting, even if we don't have the time or the ability? Because sometimes getting into these prisons is a little difficult. Not only do you have to go through a background check and a badging process, but even with that, you may show up at the gates of the prison and they may suddenly be in lockdown, or they may be in count for hours, and you may sit there in the lobby and never get in to see them that day, no matter what. So how do we help them out without visiting? First and foremost, we need to introduce the prisoners, especially those within our locale, within our neighborhood areas. We need to introduce that into our prayers, both our personal and private prayers and our prayers at Mass, to remind people that these individuals are still our brothers and sisters and they are part of our community. In fact, there's Protestant churches who have opened up satellite campuses in the prison where the volunteers, that's where they go to church. That's what they consider their church. So have they incorporated the experience of these individuals into their spiritual communities. Secondly, we can write the prisoners. You can get the prisoners' names and their incarceration numbers and the address to their prison, and you can write to the prisoners. You can build correspondence and be a pen pal. Now, what I would encourage you to do, if you choose to do this, to only use your first name and don't give them your address. Use the address at the local church and tell the church that you're going to do this, and so any mail that comes in from a prison for you should be held until you can come pick it up. That way, that's the only connection that they have to you, to know where you're at, in case their intentions are less than noble. But most of these individuals are so bored and so lonely that they will have noble intentions. Some will still try to manipulate you early on, and if you know what to look for and you get the proper training or advice, you can thwart that and keep on a very clear and steady path of prayer and support and encouragement of these individuals. The other thing that you can do is, of course, encourage other people to write. Have your students make Christmas cards, Valentine's Day cards, whatever. What also is helpful is if you were to make cards that the prisoners can send to their families, because oftentimes the prisoners have to buy these things and they have very little money. And so you can make Christmas cards and Thanksgiving cards and Valentine's Day cards and whatever that they can send home to their own families. Easter cards to help them in that way. You can do some fundraising to purchase Bible studies. Some of the DVD Catholic series that are out there would be very valuable in the collection. Even if we bought redundant versions, that would allow us to put them in many prisons instead of having to cart them around and share them across the system. So there's a lot of opportunity there as well. We also look to those who will make rosaries from time to time, although presently we've got plenty of rosaries. If somebody wanted to purchase a Magnificat subscription or a Living Word subscription, there are many different Word Among Us subscriptions, whatever. I don't want to advertise any particular organization, but newspapers, the National Catholic Register, whatever. Purchasing these and subscriptions to hand out into the prisons would be valuable as well, and encourage them to see the church that they are a part of as bigger than just the local community. We also are in need of collections of clothing and shoes for those who are in the transitional centers who are trying to go out and advertise or interview for jobs or work jobs. They need to have that because all they've had, again, for the last 20 years perhaps, is prison uniforms. This enables them to meet socially the standards of our world today, and they can look up to snuff and up to speed and match their peers in trying to recover their lives. There's a lot of information and many things that I've thrown at you here in this video. I'm sorry I could not be with you for your time of prayer and your day of reflection. I hope that if you have an interest in these works, that you'll get in touch with me or get in touch with Deacon Tolcher at the Archdiocese to see what further you can do. There are female prisons as well. I don't want to weigh this solely towards the men. So look into those opportunities in your area as well. You might have to go down into Atlanta to do some of the work. That might be a little bit of a drive, but even if you were to pick up just one day a month or something for that, it would be great help to us all, especially if you know Spanish, or if you know somebody who does, and you can rope them into this ministry, because many of the individuals in prison are Spanish speakers. And finally, there was a TV show a few years ago that was called Are You Smarter Than a Fifth Grader? When you're dealing with catechesis in the prisons, it's a lot like that. Many of these individuals are in prison because they're not educated, or if they are, they're not much beyond fifth grade. And so if you know your catechism at least that much, or you know your Bible at least that much, you don't have to get into deep theological truths. You just have to be willing to share the love of God that's already in your heart with them. Thank you, and God bless you.